Innovate 680 Policy Advisory PAC meeting. And do you have a special COVID notice to play for us, or would you like me to just state it, what the consistent with executive order?
I do have a video and I'll go ahead and play that now.
Okay, why don't you do that? That'd be great. Thanks, Terry Ann.
You're welcome.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should remute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. 30-second warning will be provided. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the COVID-19 Special Notice for Public Comment Guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Okay, well, terrific. That's always so nice to hear. So this time, let's have roll call. And Terry Ann, would you mind conducting roll call for us?
Yes, thank you. Committee Member Brown. I'm going to note that she's coming to the meeting late. Committee Member Haskew.
Here.
Committee Member Mitchoff is absent. Committee Member Obringer. Soller here. Committee Member Obringer. I will come back. I want to note she was in the meeting. She is here present. Committee Member Perkins.
Yeah.
Committee Member Ross.
Present.
Committee Member Stepper.
Here.
Committee Member Storer.
Here.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Here.
Chair Anderson.
I am here.
Committee Member Obringer. Oh,
She's in the waiting room.
Back in right now.
I just put her back in.
That's why we lost connectivity. Committee Member Obringer.
Yes, I'm back. I had a computer issue. My apologies.
Not a problem.
Great, thank you. So just want to note that Committee Member Mitchoff is the only one absent this evening.
And it is her birthday, so understandable that she's choosing other activities than us. As much fun as we all are. So now we're at public comment. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to any item under the purview of this committee, but not on tonight's agenda. And so first I'll ask, do we have any written public comment, Terry Ann?
I have not received any written public comment.
Okay, and if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to make a public comment, please go ahead and virtually raise your hand, which I think most people are not on phones, so they could raise a virtual hand. I am not seeing any, so we will move on. Oh, Karen.
Supervisor Anderson, could I ask, was Carla Brown here? I thought she was also not here.
Carla Brown is not here, and we had heard that
So,
she might be arriving.
so there's 2 absences. When you took the roll, there were 2 then, Carla and Karen Mitchoff.
Yes, that is correct. She's going to be late to the meeting, but has said that she will be here.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
No, we want to make sure we have an accurate record of who is here, so thank you. So approval of minutes, we have some PAC meeting minutes from July 8th, 2020. Is there any discussion on this? Any changes by committee members? Okay, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to comment on our minutes? Do I have a motion?
Move
So
to
moved.
approve.
Okay, moved by Robert,
Second.
second by Sue. Okay, and so let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Okay, Member Brown is absent. Member Haskew,
Yes.
Member Mitchoff is absent. Member Obringer,
Yes.
Member Perkins,
Yes.
Member Ross,
Yes.
Member Storer,
Yes.
Member Stepper,
Yes.
Vice Chair Noack,
Yes.
Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Mitchoff and Brown absent.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We do not have any consent items today, and so we're going to go right into our regular agenda items. And the first one is an informational and will be presented by Tim Hale to provide an Innovate 680 program and project update.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Really appreciate the opportunity to provide you an update of Innovate 680. And so based on some of your feedback that we've got at the last meeting, we want to make sure at each meeting we provide a detailed update on what's happening on with the program and the different projects. The other thing we want to know is, as you're listening to some of these updates, if there's any particular issue or a project that you would like to know more about, particularly at a future meeting, please let us know, especially as we get to the future agenda item on the agenda. So I do have a PowerPoint that I'm going to kick off and share. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. So I will first start with the Express Lane completion project. So we have been going through the alternative analysis process for this project. And you may have heard us talk a little bit about this project, the alternative 1A at the last meeting. This is the contraflow lane project, which was part of the close the gap alternative, which is alternative 1. So you'll notice alternative 1A, 1B, 1C, those are all design variations of alternative 1, which is the goal of that is to close the gap at the 24 interchange on I-680. So the first alternative, we have officially retired the reversible lane alternative based on safety concerns and geometric issues going through the 24 interchange. We're actually in the process of working with Caltrans to retire alternative 1B. This is the alternative that I showed you at the last meeting in terms of making modifications of the BART structure and moving the column in the medium to allow for the express lanes to be in the middle of the freeway. After further consideration, due to the construction impacts and then and significant user costs based on the number of closures and also the work windows that we would be available to do any work within the BART structure, the user costs are just tremendous. And so it really, from a cost perspective as well as a risk perspective, the overall structure based on BART's new requirements would have to be completely retrofitted as well as the existing foundations. And so by that, in terms of cost and risk based on schedule and an additional potential cost, we're actually considering retiring this alternative, which will leave us with essentially one design variation, which will ultimately just turn into alternative 1, which is close the gap with the realignment. I do have a short video to show you to see what this looks like, as well as alternative 2. This is reduce the gap with operational improvements. So this would be not having the ability to close the gap, but then put in improvements at Lawrence Way and in between Lawrence Way and Treat Boulevard, such as a braided ramp alternative or a collector distributor road, to be able to collect and minimize and reduce the weaving that's happening on the freeway. So that's really what's causing that bottleneck to really trickle down past the 24 all the way down to Bollinger Canyon in the afternoon, is really the Lawrence Way and Treat. We call it the Lawrence Way Treat bottleneck. And you'll hear more about that in future agenda items as well as we talk about some of the hot spots in the corridor. But we do have a concept to fix that operationally, and I'll show a video of that as well. Some of the key challenges, I've already mentioned the first one, which is retire alternative 1B. So we're working closely again with Caltrans and our partners to do that and develop an approach. One other item that we're currently working on, as I'm sure everyone's aware of, Senate Bill 743 and the new requirements for vehicle miles traveled. So we actually plan on bringing a future item to the Policy Advisory Committee, probably in February at our next meeting, to talk about our strategy in terms of VNT mitigation. And we've been working closely with Caltrans to develop that approach, as well as determine how to quantify, how to measure VNT in the corridor. We're also talking to Caltrans about ramp metering coordination, which you'll hear more about later in the agenda as well. So with that, I'm gonna try to play a short video for you.
Tim, I just wanted to note too that Member Brown did join the meeting at 6:08.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So we wanted to make sure that we're using visualizations like this to be able to articulate and illustrate very complex issues. And so what I'm going to show you is a simulation of going in the northbound I-680, and this would be what's alternative 1 to close the gap alternative 1C. And basically what happens is we use this technology to be able to articulate and visualize what can happen in the corridor. We actually are using virtual reality technology. So this is actually just a draft at this time, but as we continue to develop the projects, continue to develop this technology, we'll be able to use this to better communicate the alternatives to the public, to you, the Policy Advisory Committee, and others, and also have on our website to be able to understand what these alternatives will look like in the future to get better input. So in this particular video, you're in the express lanes, and at this location, you're actually on the other side of that 24 connector that's flying into the middle of the freeway from the westbound direction. And so what the video is going to do is kind of shift it and turn and give you a different perspective looking back on the corridor. And I can further articulate how the modifications will work in the corridor. So where you actually see the existing the express lanes, that's actually where the existing, whoops, I apologize, I should have paused. So the express lanes where they're at in the video is where the existing I-680 southbound is today. So what this alternative does to minimize impact to the BART structure, so we don't have to do any seismic retrofit, what it does is it shifts the I-680 southbound to the west, and I know we're looking south right now, but it shifts it to the right into the next bay or in between the two columns under the BART structure, and then that where the 680 southbound is showing on this video, that's actually where the existing 24 connector is. So we're shifting that 24 connector over to the right some more. We're going to put in a retaining wall, and that will by shifting the southbound and the westbound 24 connector over allows for that room in the median of the freeway on the I-680, the existing I-680 southbound, to have basically a fully barrier separated express lane on the 680 corridor within this section of the freeway. And what's important about that is by having barriers separated, it minimizes the weaving again where we have this extremely intense hotspot in the corridor, and it also minimizes impacts on the east side of 680 where you have the existing developments, existing Walnut Creek Public Works Center. And so we're trying to minimize all those impacts on the west side, on the east side, and shift the southbound to the west into that hillside with a retaining wall. And so the other, as I mentioned, alternative 2, we have the Lawrence Way and Treat Boulevard alternative.
Tim?
So yes.
Why was the shoulder so large? I didn't want to go on before asking. The shoulder was super large in there.
So like I mentioned before, these are still in draft, so we're still working through those. That shoulder is too big.
Okay, I just wanted to double check that. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
that shoulder wouldn't be that big. So
okay,
we're still tweaking these, we're still modifying these, but I felt it's a good opportunity to kind of articulate what some of these alternatives are doing.
Yeah, no thanks.
And get some feedback. So here, this is North Main Street. This is again looking north on 680. You can see Lawrence Way there getting on the freeway. This is actually the braided concept that we're considering. We also have another alternative, the collector distributor road system. And this is again looking at solving that weaving and that's happening between Lawrence Way and Treat to minimize the weaving and reduce congestion on 680, thereby reducing that bottleneck. You'll also note that the truck scales are there, so those do get impacted. And so we're working closely with Caltrans and CHP to incorporate that into the overall design. The video is going to rotate now and go south. and show you the different perspective of the overall braided structure. We're obviously trying to minimize impact to the Walnut Creek Public Works facility there. And we're also looking at ramp metering in the corridor, which you're going to hear a lot about today, is some of the concepts that we're doing with ramp metering. And so ramp metering gives us the ability to manage and meter the traffic onto the freeway, thereby, again, managing those bottlenecks, managing that congestion on the freeway. And this gives you a perspective of what it would look like as you're driving through the braided connector and stopping at the ramp metering before you get onto the freeway. So again, what we're planning on doing is actually developing visualizations like this all the way from Bollinger Canyon all the way up to 242 to better articulate some of the strategies and projects that we're developing in the corridor.
Unmute me, and then let's see if anyone has any additional questions before we go on. Did anyone have, besides Sue, any questions about that presentation so far?
When you throw in a traffic light somewhere in, if I understand the picture correctly, in the middle of a freeway, do you get a lot of rear enders, or is it less natural for the drivers?
Hopefully that's a metering light, wasn't it, Tim?
Yeah, that was a ramp. That was on the on ramp. That wasn't in the. Hopefully that wasn't in the middle. That was actually on the Lauren Way on ramp, and so that's really intended to meter traffic getting onto the freeway. But we are also looking at ways to put in. You'll hear more about this in the next agenda item. But we're also looking at way to put in wayfinding signs and other advanced signs on the local arterials and do a better job of integrating the local arterials with the ramp metering and into the freeway. So you'll hear more about that in the next agenda item.
Desperately needed. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before Tim goes on? Oh, yes, Carla, please, welcome.
Get myself off of mute. Hi. Thank you, Tim, for the presentation. As we know, traffic continues to grow and expand. So every time we look at an expansion that's significant like this, is there a way, like we were discussing about those wide medians, to actually do 2 vehicles and upsize it with an expectation for growth in the future? Or is this the maximum capacity for that corridor?
This will be the maximum capacity for this corridor. This corridor is from a physical constraint standpoint, is really the maximum feasible amount of lanes that we can actually fit in the 680 corridor, just based on the constraints and the existing properties that are adjacent to the corridor. As I mentioned in previous meetings, this corridor is very physically constrained on both sides of the corridor. So we're essentially only widening where we absolutely have to in order to really reduce the congestion, reduce weaving, and make operational improvements in the corridor. And you'll hear more about this, but one of the things that we're also looking at is okay, what's the maximum service flow rate in the corridor? So you'll hear more about that in the next agenda item as well, in terms of how much actual maximum throughput can we actually get through the corridor, and then how do we manage to that? So you'll hear more about that in the next agenda item.
Okay, so one follow-on question, Tim. What I saw was a very impacted, not only freeway, but express lane. Is there room for emergency vehicles to get through? What route would that take?
Absolutely. So we always plan routes for emergency vehicles, and so that's obviously really important in terms of incident management and so forth in the corridor. Freeway service patrol, make sure we're getting to people as soon as we can. And so these barrier separated facilities, this will be a very limited portion within the corridor. So it would really only be within the 24 interchange area. Other areas will have, like you've seen on the southern part of the corridor, you have continuous access. So that you'll see a lot more of that as you get out of this. Really, the constraint is between 24 and 242. So it's going to be a limited, probably most likely be a limited access type facility between the 24 and the 242 interchange to, again, minimize that weaving, because what you don't want people happening is you don't want people taking the express lanes and then exiting the express lanes after they pass the 24 and then weave over all the lanes to get to 242. So we're trying, what we want to do is avoid that movement. So we want people, if they're going to be in 242, we want to make sure it's signed correctly to make sure that they stay on 680 to go on to 242 And that'll be at the next, at that access point before they enter into that barrier separated facility.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, any other questions before Tim goes on?
Carlin Obringer, I do have a question. So I heard you mention, Tim, that so you showed us this video of this section that you're talking about tonight. So when will you have videos? We're just talking about the 242 interchange. So when would that be available? And then just a second question. I know that you're talking to all of us tonight who are policymakers, but are you also sharing these videos and this information with our TAC, with PAC and SWAT and the other entities involved here?
So you are the first to see this video that we've shared tonight. We literally just finished it this week. And yes, so once this video is finalized, we plan to share it with our other partners. Certainly can share it with the RTPCs. We can send it out, make sure it gets distributed. We do plan on posting these videos on our website, making sure that they're publicly available. So those are all the future plans that we have for these videos, making sure people have access to and understand what we're doing in the corridor. In terms of the other components of the corridor, we do plan on so the next meeting in February for the Policy Advisory Committee, at the last meeting, there was a lot of interest in transit in the corridor. And so at the February meeting, we do plan on doing a very focused topic on transit and how that is being planned in the corridor. And so that's where we'll show more videos about the part-time transit lane, the shared mobility hubs, and how that's actually operating more in the southern part of the corridor. In terms of the section in the 242, that's probably going to be a future meeting, maybe at the March, April meeting, most likely.
Thank you.
Okay, Karen, you've got a question?
No, I really just have a comment because I was so impressed with that video. It just that between that and a paper map on the wall, no comparison. So it was great.
It does.
Thank you.
Help us novices visualize exactly what it's going to look like. Not that we're really novices when we've been doing it this long, but it's still very nice to have it visualized for us. So, okay, any other questions before Tim carries on? Okay, Tim, back to it.
Perfect, thank you. So the next couple of projects that we're talking about is the automated driving system grants, and we are in the process, in the midst of finalizing the agreement with the Federal Transit Administration. We plan on actually taking something to the authority board, most likely in November or December. We plan on having the notice to proceed from FTA, probably winter of 2020, hopefully by December or maybe January. CCTA staff is in the process of securing the local partnership program funding for the project and working closely with Caltrans. Some of the key challenges and decisions, this is a very complicated project, and so probably one of the most challenging things that we've been dealing with on this project is really coordinating and finalizing the scope between all the partners, between Nissan and Verizon and County Connection. And so it's a very complicated project and been a real challenge. And so that's, we got the notice, we actually got the notice to award last, I think last October, November. So we're kind of moving in about a year in terms of getting our notice to proceed. The next project is the mobility as a service. So this project is, we've executed all our agreements. We're making a lot of progress. We're working closely with UC Berkeley to develop the project evaluation plan, which aligns with the goals that we outlined for you at the last meeting. We also have addressed FHWA comments on that project evaluation plan, as well as addressing comments from FHWA on the concept of operations, as well as we're coordinating with the transit agencies and starting to actually develop and coordinate with some of our other mobility partners as part of that project, such as Uber and bike share and car share. Obviously this project, because it's very transit and share mobility intensive, is obviously being impacted by COVID-19, and as well as the financial impacts, but also as well as a timing and coordination standpoint. So we're working certainly through those challenges to meet the project needs. We're actually working with with FHWA to determine a better way of managing cash flow and doing a tapered match. This project is a 50-50 match. We're trying to develop a way to help our partners, especially our transit partners, on their cash flow issues by using a tapered match for this project. The other project, which you're going to hear a lot more in the next agenda item, is the advanced technology project. We've been working really closely with Caltrans to develop the coordinated adaptive ramp metering project. We've actually have gone through and studied the northbound and southbound directions. So we have very project specific 680 corridor specific analysis of how we would apply and implement coordinated adaptive ramp metering in this corridor. We're working closely with Caltrans on integrating this project with the Caltrans ramp metering projects. We're developing some layouts and project scope so we can integrate what we're doing with their project and make sure we have the appropriate resources to do so. The Caltrans ramp meter, the key challenge there is we've been working again closely with Caltrans to integrate with the Caltrans ramp metering projects. We're actually going to be presenting this at our next program leadership team meeting with Caltrans in December. And Caltrans ramp metering project, they have about $130 million of 2020 SHOP funding. And so we're in the process of amending their project description. And they're expected to start the environmental document phase here very, very soon. From the public engagement standpoint, Lindsay Willis, our Director of Regional Affairs, and Convey have been working very hard on developing our first Innovate 680 newsletter, which has been attached to your agenda under communications and correspondences. So our plan is to post these hopefully at a quarterly basis to be able to provide people with updates on what's happening with the projects, and also to look for ways or explain to the public how they can better engage with the project, both on our website and other opportunities. We publish all the project fact sheets, the program website. At the last Policy Advisory Committee, we talked also a brief update about the behavior surveys that we're doing. And so we're in the process of finalizing the survey, and that we're hoping to have initial findings in January, which might be a good time to bring that to the Policy Advisory Committee, probably in February or at the next meeting in April. As you've already seen, we've been preparing the virtual reality graphics, and at your request from the last meeting, Lindsay is working on developing the social media posts and graphics to share with all you, and we will share those via email with you to be able to post on your and do what you wish with it on social media. So we have been working on the program level concept operations, and this is really key because we're trying to make sure you all have the tools to start making policy decisions. Next year is going to be very intense in terms of, instead of having informational items, we're going to have action items. We're going to be looking towards the Policy Advisory Committee to start making recommendations on the various policies, and Danielle's going to talk a little bit about that in a future agenda item. Since the last time we've met, we had one additional TAC concept operations working group meeting to discuss the first and last miles aspect of the project, talk about the shared mobility hub network, as well as get input from the TAC about the mobility on demand, mobility as a service project. UC Berkeley, to prepare the program about project evaluation plan, needed some specific input from our TAC and local partners along the corridor in order to complete that, to be able to do a user analysis and survey for that project evaluation plan. Since then, the team has met individually with all of the TAC member agencies, all of the cities, the counties, and we've been seeking direct one-on-one feedback of how are we doing? How do you see the progress is going? Is there any way we can improve our meetings? And we're excited to say that everyone has enjoyed the TAC ConOp meetings. They found them very valuable. The information has been very valuable. Some of the things that have been, we talked about those one-on-one meetings is, again, we're starting to discuss the future operational maintenance issues. So as we start talking about how to integrate the local arterial system in with the freeway system, there certainly is going to be operational maintenance issues that need to be discussed. And so we also are going to be hosting our next ConOp meeting next Monday. And we're actually going to be sharing a very similar presentation that you're going to be seeing today to the TAC ConOp working group, and be able to summarize the findings in detail with the TAC, with everyone relative to what we found and input from each of the TAC member agencies for Innovate 680. So that concludes the first agenda item. So I can turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for any questions or comments.
Okay, well, we've got more information. Any questions from committee members? And not seen anyone in the audience here who has any questions about what's been presented so far. And please raise your virtual hand. Not seen any, so that is terrific. So next item is also going to be informational, and it's going to be, I believe we're talking about some of our advanced technologies project. The coordinated ramp metering demonstration. The fear that every city has that you're going to back up traffic onto their streets. So Tim, is this a real model that's going to just ease everybody's fears?
That's our hope. That's what we want. That's exactly what we want to demonstrate in this corridor. So just to kind of tee this up for Darren, I'm going to turn it over to Darren Henderson, our corridor manager from WSP, but we really wanted to spend the bulk of our time tonight on this particular item. So this item has a part A and a part B, if you will. And so be patient with us. There's a lot of information, and we can certainly take questions as we need to throughout the presentation, or we can wait to the end. But there is a pause moment in the middle to take questions, and then we'll take questions at the end as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darren and share my screen.
Terrific.
Thanks, Tim. So as Tim has mentioned, we're going to cover quite a bit of information in this part of the presentation, and it's all related to the coordinated adaptive ramp metering strategy that we're developing for the 680 corridor. It's important to note that the long-term vision is to implement this type of approach on the entire length of the corridor, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight, particularly in the second half of the presentation, is really focused on the southern section, the section south of State Route 24. And that's because of the work that Tim showed you in the flyover simulations. The fact that there are a lot of factors in the tree area that are still being addressed by other projects. And so we are looking at implementation of this strategy in that area as more of a long-term approach. So don't fear if that's your part of the county. We are intending to get there. It's just a matter of a lot of other things have to happen in order to be ready for coordinated adaptive metering. But okay, so the first part of the presentation is just going to give you an overview of the concept. I think we touched on it very, very briefly in a previous meeting, but this one's going to get into a little bit more detail. And then to Supervisor Anderson's question on ramp metering and your experience with ramp metering in the past, I'm going to try and illustrate to you how this concept is different from what you've seen before, and will address some of those problems that you have experienced or that you might have experienced in the past with traffic backing up at ramp metering locations. This is one of those instances where doing it virtually is a lot more difficult than if we were all together in person and I could actually point to things on a screen and be more clear in illustrating that to you, but we're going to give this a try. If you have any questions as we go along, please do raise your hand and we'll be happy to stop and try to answer as much as we can. So Tim, if you want to go to the first slide. So the concept that we're employing is really an overarching structure called managed freeways. And what that's doing is applying a lot of familiar tools that we use in traffic management, things like ramp meters, things like variable speed limits, variable lane control signs, the type of stuff that you might have seen on the I-80 corridor, but really doing it in a different way. And so it's all about providing a comprehensive package of strategies that is all working together to optimize the traffic flows on the freeway, not just to deal with recurrent or non-recurrent conditions or sort of incident response, but really trying to be proactive and managing how traffic is flowing on the freeway so that we can try to avoid letting the freeway break down and falling into that congested state that we've seen in the past. Go ahead, Tim. So this is not just theoretical. This is a concept that was developed in Australia about 15 years ago by the Victorian Department of Transportation. They used to be referred to as Vic Roads. They're now referred to as Vic Dot. So I will use that interchangeably. And in the Melbourne metropolitan area, which is the capital of that state, they now have over 100 miles of freeways that are being managed with this concept. And unlike most cities here in the United States, they generally don't see congestion on their freeways anymore. Not as a post-COVID thing, but in normal function, their freeways are able to sustain much more productive flow rates. They're able to avoid the onset of congestion. That's that type of benefit that we are trying to strive to achieve on the 680 corridor. Go ahead, Tim. So why is this important? Well, it can really be very financially desirable to us. I mean, obviously, if we can improve the flows on the freeway, and the type of experience that they've had in Melbourne is that they've been able to increase their flow rates by about 25% during the peak periods. What that means is that they're actually gaining a lane's worth of capacity on their 4-lane freeway just by improving that flow, the productivity of their traffic flows. That allows us to then not have to invest in building that additional capacity. And Tim's already talked about the physical constraints that we have in the 680 corridor that really prevent us from adding more lanes in that corridor. That, of course, has economic benefits. They're able to increase or reduce the cost effects of congestion in the order of $2 million a day, which is very significant to their regional economy, because commuters, goods and services are not being delayed by being stuck in congestion. They can be more productive. And then the other benefit, of course, is the reduction in accidents. And they've seen a very significant reduction in accident rates as a result of, again, improving traffic flows on their freeways. So the main tool that they use as part of their managed freeways in order to accomplish that benefit is the coordinated adaptive ramp metering. And how this system works and what makes it different from the systems that we use in the United States and those that you might be familiar with is that all of the ramps in a corridor are working together as a single system to balance demands along the entire corridor, so that way no one ramp has to take all of the demand. So in a current example in the US, you might see a particular location where a ramp has very high demand that is causing it to back up onto the arterial streets. Ramp metering systems in the US tend to be more ramp focused. They may coordinate with other adjacent ramps, but they're generally not looking along the full length of a corridor to try and balance that demand. And so what really makes this different and what makes it effective at minimizing the impacts on your arterial streets is the fact that we can balance the demand across all the ramps in a corridor and ensure that no one location is getting overstressed and is therefore backing up into your streets. So to illustrate that, I'm going to walk through an example from a location in Australia. And this is where it's going to get really hard to do virtually, but I hope that you can follow along. This chart is showing you occupancy on the freeway. That's lane occupancy, so the amount of time that the freeway is occupied by a vehicle. Sometimes you might think of it as density. The darker the blue, the more dense or the more heavy the traffic is on the freeway. You can see that it operates in bands as it goes across the freeway, with the direction of traffic from the bottom to the top and time across the x-axis. So each one of those bands is a platoon of traffic moving up the freeway, and it goes from sort of concentrated packs of cars to another group that might be a little less dense. And that's how you see these waves of traffic moving down the freeway. What the system is doing is looking at how those waves of traffic or those platoons of traffic are moving up and down the freeway and adjusting the ramp metering rates in real time in order to reflect that. It's also looking at the ramp demands at each of the ramp locations, and those ramp locations are illustrated by the arrows on the left-hand side column to show you where the 5 interchanges are along this particular freeway corridor. And then the brown lines that you see horizontally across the exhibit are actually the ramp metering rates at each of those ramp sites. And so this is an example of a managed motorway on the Bruce Highway just outside of Brisbane, Australia, working through a morning peak period in order to resolve the issues in that corridor. So let's go ahead and give it a try, Tim. So the critical bottleneck location in this particular corridor is just downstream of Anzac Avenue. It's a major commercial location in this particular area, not dissimilar to what you have at like Bollinger Canyon, for example, where you have major employers, major retailers, all sort of co-located in a single area. And that means that that ramp really has to function with very heavy demand to get on and off of the freeway. So in this particular example, you can see that one tiny little blue pixel that is indicated that the freeway is starting to increase in density at that location. So the system immediately recognizes that that's happening. It's anticipating that there's going to be increased demand in the corridor at the start of the morning peak period. And so the meters turn on at Anzac Avenue, and they also turn on at Boundary Road at the same time, because they know that those two need to work together in order to resolve that problem. Go ahead, Tim. So it continues to operate in that state for a while, and it's able to keep the queues on Anzac Avenue relatively stable, but eventually the queues on Anzac Avenue are starting to back up, and the system detects that it's seeing those queues get longer. So what it's doing is starting to reduce the cycle length at Anzac Avenue so it can release more vehicles onto the freeway. At the same time, at Boundary, you can see that the cycle lengths are getting darker, which means they're actually holding more traffic back at Boundary to balance that demand between those two ramps. And eventually what happens is Boundary's no longer able to do it by itself. So then the ramp meter at Deception Bay Road also turns on and starts helping out to take some of that demand as well. And so by all three of those locations working together, they're able to resolve the queuing on the ramps themselves and also maintain flow on the freeways so that it never becomes over congested or oversaturated and would fall into a state of congestion. And eventually, in about a 15-minute period, they're able to stabilize the flows at that location and deal with that sort of peak of demand right around 6 a.m. And then the freeway goes back into a more stable condition. And go ahead, Tim. Again, an hour and a half later, the same situation occurs. You can see the Anzac Avenue metering rates are going from dark to light, dark to light. That's where it's working to try and adjust those queues. Boundary Road is stepping in and taking some of that load. And then when Boundary Road's no longer able to help, Deception Bay Road is stepping in and also taking some of that demand. Again, the system is working together across all of the ramps simultaneously to balance the demand so that way it can minimize the potential for backup onto the arterial system. And based on that experience in Australia, they don't see queues on the ramps backing up onto their arterial streets. The system is always able to respond and find a way to resolve that issue before it becomes a problem. And it works because the corridor is using not just one control algorithm, but multiple control algorithms that's looking at all of those different components in order to determine an appropriate metering rate at the local ramp, but also at a corridor level. So if a local ramp is not able to manage demand, it can call to one of its neighbors and say, okay, I need you to help me out. I need you to come and help me lift this heavy load. And that's how the system is able to balance that demand across the entire corridor. So just in summary, managed freeways and the use of coordinated adaptive metering is a comprehensive strategy that utilizes multiple control algorithms to optimize flows along an entire corridor. What really differentiates it from systems that you might be familiar with is that it is balancing ramp demand and queuing along the entire corridor in real time. It's not an isolated ramp location or a couple of ramps working together. This is the entire system continuously looking at a full corridor and balancing those demands continuously to minimize the risk of that backup you're concerned about. The overarching system is then able to also consolidate other traffic management devices, other ITS elements into a single platform so that those can also work harmoniously with the coordinated adaptive ramp metering so that way the entire system is working together seamlessly and providing the most effective solution to your traffic problems. So that was a lot of information that we've had to condense into a relatively short period of time. I'm sure some of you will have questions, so we're going to pause here for a moment and give you the chance to ask any questions or make any comments.
Okay, we start with our committee members. Robert.
Good, Darren. Thank you for trying to explain a very complicated science. So it looked like the dates on there were September 2020.
Yes.
Were these studies done during COVID and Australia naturally, and were those traffic patterns at a normal level or at a COVID level?
Yeah, so that example was taken from a live demonstration that we did with our Australian partners in September, and that included representatives from Caltrans and other stakeholders that are involved in our project and also a companion project in Riverside County. It's worth noting that in many of the states in Australia, they are generally open for business. They don't have the level of restrictions that we have for COVID. Australia took some very draconian measures at the start of the pandemic. and in many states were able to basically stop COVID from entering their jurisdictions. And so they've been able to pretty much stay open for business without any sort of restrictions. So although their traffic is down probably a few percentage points over what it was this time last year, that is normal traffic conditions that you were seeing in that example. So we felt that it was still a valid example to use to illustrate this particular point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions by anyone on the committee? I'm going to open it up to anyone in the audience. Have any questions? Please raise your virtual hand, or I think it's *9. Not seen any, so continue, you two. We're great.
Okay, Tim. So recognizing the potential of this concept, as I said at the start of the presentation, our goal is to implement this type of managed freeways approach for the entire 680 corridor. Also recognizing the limitations that we've had in a portion of the corridor, we really focused our evaluation for an initial phase to be deployed in the southern half of the corridor. So what I'm going to talk about now is a brief summary of the results of those initial feasibility studies and the recommendations that we're making and now working with Caltrans to try and advance in this particular corridor. So go ahead, Tim. So we did start by looking at the full length of the study corridor, and these are two heat plots that represent the northbound and the southbound I-680 from county line to county line, and you can see the directions of travel illustrated by the arrows on the right sides of each exhibit. And this data these data are taken from 2018. The reason we took data from October 2018 is it precedes the start of construction on the southbound express lanes project. So it is the last time that we had relatively stable traffic in the corridor that was not affected by major construction. And of course, it precedes the coronavirus pandemic. So we really started at this point figuring it was a fairly decent representation of conditions in the corridor. What these charts tell us is that there's some fairly obvious areas of congestion on a recurrent basis in the vicinity of Treat Boulevard and South Main Street, and you can see those by the largest of the red blotches. In the northbound direction, it occurs in the afternoon peak period. In the southbound direction, it occurs in the AM or morning peak period. But you can also see that there's some secondary bottleneck locations that are further south of that area. In the vicinity of Sycamore Valley Road on the northbound side, stretching up towards Livorno, and then a couple of locations, one from Stone Valley upwards towards South Main Street in the southbound direction, and then a second one that forms down around Bollinger Canyon Road in the evening peak period in the southbound direction. Those really are the focus of what we're looking at in this particular evaluation. We think that the use of coordinated adaptive metering can really go a long way to mitigating those secondary bottlenecks in the southern half of the corridor, as well as have some benefits to the northbound bottleneck in north of the study area that we've been looking at, because we can control the traffic flows better into that location. In the southbound direction, it really doesn't help us a whole lot because the traffic is coming from locations that are not part of our current study area. So that really directed us to focusing in on this study area. So the limits, as I mentioned before, are from the State Route 24 interchange, system interchange with Interstate 680, and extending south down to the Alameda County line. And in the case of the southbound recommendations, we're also looking at our Costa Boulevard ramp, which is actually in Alameda County, but we think is necessary to be part of the solution because it's integral to that San Ramon, our Costa Boulevard location. So the first thing we did was go out into the field and take a look at what we're dealing with. We did this back in the late spring, early summer, so we did have the benefit of COVID-19 keeping traffic volumes down, so it was quite safe and easy for us to get out there and to take a look. What we found is we have a lot of opportunities in this area. There's a number of ramps that have already been widened as part of other projects. So that will help to reduce the capital or civil works that are necessary in order to accommodate ramp metering at some of these locations. Some locations already have detection, have cabinets with ITS vaults, et cetera, located in the corridor. So we think we may be able to leverage some of those. We really didn't find any fatal flaws to the ability to implement this concept in this particular study area, but there are some constraints in terms of embankments, existing structures, sound walls, other physical features that are present that will need to be addressed when we get into a design phase. We also do some corridor ramp metering analysis, and that really takes a couple of steps. We do this because we need to understand if there's any constraints in terms of mainline capacity, in terms of the available storage space or discharge capacity on the ramps to be able to accommodate the metering. We start by looking at the maximum sustainable flow rates on the main line as sort of a screening tool to identify if we have any bottleneck locations on the main line, what are the contributing factors. And then we use what's called an R model, which is basically a statistical analysis tool that allows us to test a range of different metering rates and storage needs as a basis for then making recommendations on what the ramps need to look like in order to accommodate this type of improvement. And those were done with pre-COVID data from 2019, from November of 2019. So as I said, that first step in the process is doing a screening of the maximum sustainable flow rates. This is not the capacity of the roadway, but it represents the actual flow that you could sustain, taking into account some of the constraints that there may be in the corridor. So if there's a lane drop or a grade or some sort of a factor like that in the corridor, it has an effect on the ability of that roadway to carry sufficient traffic. So what you see in this chart, or in these charts, the black line represents that maximum sustainable flow rate, the sort of maximum capacity that the road has to carry traffic. And then the blue and red bars represent the observed volumes from November of 2019. And you can see highlighted in red are locations where there are volumes that are exceeding the maximum sustainable flow rate of the freeway. So what that means is that those locations are at risk of breaking down and becoming unstable and then falling into a congested state. And there's no surprise that those are the locations that correspond to those red blotches that you saw on the heat plot earlier. So in the southbound direction, similar, actually a little bit more locations. Really the core part of the corridor is affected by capacity constraints during the morning peak period in particular. And you can see a number of locations where the flow rates, the current flow rates are exceeding those maximum sustainable flow rates. Now, the good news is that none of those locations are substantially over the maximum sustainable flow rate. So it means that there's an elevated risk that they will fall into an unstable condition, but it doesn't guarantee that that will happen. And so that's really the margins that we're working with coordinated adaptive metering. What we're trying to do is to better control traffic into these locations so that way we can prevent that instability and that flow breakdown and keep the freeway as productive as possible. And the more traffic that we can handle on the freeway, the less traffic is going to intrude onto your arterials. So the next step in the process is to actually conduct that R model analysis that looks at the ramp storage and the ramp wait times. And these exhibits illustrate those two measures. The upper half of the charts represents the wait time at each of the ramp locations. And this is the northbound direction. And then the lower half of the exhibit represents the queue lengths at each of the ramp locations. The blue bars represent a range from the 50th percentile to the 95th percentile. So an average case on the bottom end to an almost extreme case on the upper end. And you can see in this particular example, in the northbound direction, we can keep our wait times well below the 4-minute desirable range that we like to use for managed freeways purposes. And Caltrans actually uses 7 to 10 minutes for their ramp metering. So we are very confident that we can get these ramps to work effectively. What you can also see is that there's a number of ramps where that range is pretty consistently, from 0 up to sort of the 3-minute mark. That's the cluster of ramps that would be working together to balance demands across each of those ramp locations in order to mitigate those bottlenecks that you saw, or the red bars that you saw on the previous chart. In the bottom half for the queue lengths, the blue bar represents the 50th and 95th percentile ranges, and then the red dashes represent the existing capacity on those ramps. So you can see that at all of the locations, we're not getting close to the existing storage. We are, however, proposing some additional storage at a number of these locations to deal with future demand, and also to deal with the ability to discharge more traffic when that opportunity exists. So in the southbound direction, we see more of the ramps working more robustly to deal with the particular issues that we identified in or can see in those heat plots. So if you look at the bottom left exhibit, the storage length one, you can see in this particular exhibit, there's a number of locations where the 95th percentile storage is getting very close to the existing storage in the corridor. And again, this is an example where even under no improvements, we haven't added any capacity, the system would be working together to mitigate and balance the demand on all of those ramps to address the bottleneck that is downstream of Sycamore Valley Road. And so you can also see that reflected in the wait times, with many of the wait times getting closer to the 4-minute mark as a result of that. But the good news to take away from all of this is that we have sufficient storage, even under existing conditions. We are confident that the level of demand that is out there can be managed with a coordinated adaptive metering strategy, although we are making recommendations to add some additional discharge capacity and some additional storage capacity to deal with those future demands, and also the ability to discharge more traffic as we need to. So this is really guiding the development of some conceptual designs now for the ramps in your various the various locations. Tim, I think if you go to the next slide, there's an example. Oh, no, this is summarizing the results. Okay, so I was just saying we can manage the traffic flows. We do need to meter the connector from State Route 24 in the southbound direction, so that will be an additional element to the project. Although metering freeway to freeway connectors is not new in District 4, and in fact, the 580 connectors from 680 are already metered. We can manage the ramp queues within existing capacity with that additional capacity that I talked about. So I got ahead of myself. Here's a conceptual design that we've developed for one of the locations in the corridor. This particular location, and there's a couple of these examples in the corridor, we have what's called a partial cloverleaf interchange design. So those of you from the southern end of the region would recognize these interchanges. It's where we have a directional sort of diamond ramp, and in combination with a tight loop ramp for the opposite direction. One of the challenges we see with these interchanges, and we've observed it in your particular examples, is that the weave distance and the merge distance from these ramps is very short, particularly the loop ramp. It really is only a few hundred feet that is provided to allow vehicles on the ramp to accelerate and weave into the general purpose traffic stream. Now that's fine in COVID conditions when there's not a whole lot of traffic out there and there's plenty of space, but it really becomes a problem when the traffic is relatively dense and moving faster on the freeways, and it really can be very disruptive. So one of the things that we are proposing is to consolidate these ramps together into a single threshold point. And Tim, if you can move your arrow along to the threshold right there, go back just a touch. So basically it will come to a single stop bar where the metering will be provided, and then there's a longer distance that we can allow there, right there where Tim's pointing, and then we can allow a longer distance for traffic to accelerate. And actually at a couple of these locations, we have auxiliary lanes that the traffic is able to merge into. So it helps to improve the stability of traffic flows and minimize the disruption at these locations. And it also helps us to more effectively manage it with ramp metering, because now we'll have better storage provided at these locations. In addition to the freeways, we are looking at some opportunities on the arterial streets, and we touched on this with your public works staff when we met over the last few weeks. One of the things we're interested in demonstrating is the use of traveler information signs on the arterial streets. This is an integral component of the Melbourne project. They have these small variable message signs that are located near the approaches to their freeway ramps, so that way they can communicate alternative travel times to drivers. And we feel that it would be useful to include some of these as part of this demonstration. And we're really focused right now on the San Ramon area to demonstrate a few of these, primarily because there's a number of arterial corridors in that area that are running parallel to the freeway. So there's alternatives that are provided that would benefit from having these examples. But ultimately, we're looking at potentially including these along the entire corridor. The other traveler information tool that we use is enhanced, go ahead, Tim, is enhanced signage at the ramps themselves. Caltrans typically has an illuminated sign that indicates that the ramp meter is on, but it generally doesn't provide any other information. What we like to do with the managed freeways approach is to use a small variable message sign that actually has the capability to display a range of information. And that's so that we can actually indicate if there's an accident or something on the freeway that needs the ramp to be closed, or has some other major disruption, we can actually provide that information and discourage people from actually turning onto the freeway. There's not much use in directing people onto a freeway if the freeway is broken down and fallen into a congested state. So the better information that we can provide to our travelers, the more effective we can be in managing our system. So this is another element that will be integrated into the project, which will be a first for here in California. Tim mentioned at the start that Caltrans does have its own ramp metering project. They have received SHOP funding to install ramp metering along the full length of I-680 in Contra Costa County and also a couple of other segments of freeway in your neighboring counties. There's a lot of consistency between what they had proposed doing as part of their ramp metering project and what we are doing as part of this CARM demonstration. The ramp meter installations themselves, the ramp improvements, those are all things that would have been done under the Caltrans ramp metering project. And so we're working right now with Caltrans staff, and there's a number of them on this call, to identify where those similarities exist and to see what can actually be accommodated through that project, and then to identify the different elements that we would be doing specific to CARM and figuring out a strategy for how we can actually get those deployed. So we met with those Caltrans staff just recently and went over the findings that we've presented to you today. And we're also coordinating with Headquarters District 8 on some other efforts in the state. And we think we have a common vision of where we're trying to go and are very diligently working together to figure out how to get there. We continue to develop those conceptual designs. Go back just for a second. We continue to develop those conceptual designs and cost estimates that really will help inform the subsequent steps in the process, who does what, how we integrate CARM into the overall program, and that will be reflected in the program concept of operations. And then we will be continuing to work with your TAC to develop more specific recommendations as part of the project, help them understand some of those technical details, and then ultimately bring some of these elements in later phases to the arterial system and have some of those same benefits extend to the local communities.
Okay.
And on that, it is another fire hose of information that I've asked you to drink, and I will happily take any questions that you may have.
And Darren, let me just add a few comments on these points. There's a reason why there's no ramp metering in the 680 corridor. There's a lot of concerns around it. There's a reason why. And so what we wanted to do with this presentation is really articulate, I know it was a lot of technical information, but we wanted to articulate the real differences in the approaches that we're taking with this compared to some of the other approaches that have been taken on other corridors. And so that was the whole point of this presentation, is really to demonstrate how different and how much what the increased productivity and the enhancement you'll get out of a system like this, other than, because you've all seen the ramp metering in the Bay Area, and there's different types of ramp metering, but you've been in the ramp meter on I-80 Smart Corridor, you've seen the ramp meter on State Route 4, and so we wanted to make sure that we bring a new level of ramp metering to this corridor to really address the concerns of all the local jurisdictions. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for questions and comments.
Well, thank you. It looks like Karen, you have a question.
I do. There was that last bit of information a couple minutes ago with this messaging, trying to increase the messages on the ramp meters. Right before then, you talked about giving comparison times for different routes. Isn't that what people get right now on their GPS? I don't understand what we're adding here. I mean, if you're on Google, it's going to tell you this 14 minutes this way, 16 minutes this way.
No, that's true. I mean, there are other technologies out there that are providing some of that same information, but there's still a lot of people that, like, for example, at Bollinger Canyon, you know, the businesses there closed down at 5 o'clock under normal conditions post-COVID. You know, there's a large amount of traffic that's going to come out of there and start looking to go up the freeway. They don't all necessarily look at their phone to see if Waze or Google is going to tell them the travel time, because it's their normal commute home. It's just the path that they take. So these signs can help deal with some of those travelers that are not necessarily using those devices at that moment in time, so that way the decision point is right there for them. We're just making it as easy as it possibly can be for them to make a better choice. And it's a relatively inexpensive mechanism to use. Those signs are, you know, as LED technologies become more available with things like TVs, you know, the use of that same technology for things like roadway signs is now becoming far, far cheaper. So we can deploy those signs relatively inexpensive. The system has all of that information that's already being developed to provide the background for the ramp metering strategy. So we're easily able to provide them very accurate travel times to reflect those alternatives that are available to them.
Oh, thank you, because I do think there's signage somewhere that we're missing a lot when we have things that shut down, a ramp shuts down, or we have too many lanes closing. I can't believe the number right now that are closing the traffic off from the right to the left. And so those kind of things would be very helpful, because I saw a near accident 2 nights ago.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of people on this call that have experienced that phenomenon of turning onto the freeway ramp only to find the backup on the ramp itself at the point of no return, and now being stuck there when you could have quite easily, if you'd have known, continued down an arterial street and taken an alternative to avoid that situation.
Thank you. Good example.
These signs are the sort of thing that can help overcome that type of scenario.
Okay, and so I've got Robert, Sue, and then Scott. It's got this little ear thing going. Is that a question too? So let's start with Robert. We'll go to Sue and then to Scott.
Great, thank you. Darren or Timothy, when we're looking at traffic efficiency and we're talking about ramp metering, is it the only way we can do ramp metering is if every on-ramp has the metering throughout all of our cities?
Yeah, that is really key. In order for this type of an approach that is a systematic corridor level approach, it requires every single access point to the freeway to be metered. Think about it like in terms of a sports stadium. If you had a football game going on at Levi Stadium and one of the gates was left open, it would only take a matter of seconds before everyone on Twitter would know that gate is open, and they'd all be going there to try and get inside. Well, that's exactly what happens when you don't meter every ramp location along the corridor. People figure it out. They think that they're going to be able to take a shortcut and avoid that meter by going to that location. And then we don't have the ability to control the traffic that's entering at that point. And so then it puts more stress on the freeway at other locations. So it's really critical that for this to be effective, we are metering all of the ramps along the corridor. Even if there's not a lot of traffic on those ramps and they don't usually experience any sort of problem, that's how we can use all of the ramps to balance that demand along the corridor and make it work more equitably.
So when we're working with individual cities, let's use Danville as an example. I'm sure that Andy Dillard and Ty Williams understand ramp metering, but we have a town manager that doesn't love ramp metering, and he hasn't loved it for 30 years. So are you working with individual cities to get them comfortable on ramp metering, which will help make our decision a little bit easier?
Yes.
Yes.
That question is yes.
Yes. I mean, part of it is working with you through this committee to educate you on what we're doing and how it's different from the traditional ramp metering approach. We're giving the same information to the TAC. They've seen past presentations. They'll get an even more detailed version of this presentation on Monday. We've had the one-on-one meetings where we've been able to talk to them about some of their concerns with ramp metering and again, illustrate that point. We're working with all of the regional stakeholders. I mean, to Tim's credit, one of the things he set up with this program is a very comprehensive stakeholder outreach and engagement process where we are regularly interfacing with you guys, your technical staff, and the other stakeholders in the region to try and educate them on these differences. And trust me, as one of the practitioners that has to do this, when I come into a room and tell people we're going to ramp meter your neighborhood, their immediate reaction is not one of, yay, let's do it now. But hopefully, as we go through these presentations and we can demonstrate to you how it's different, the benefits that we can actually see, and then actually undertake this sort of initial demonstration project or this initial first phase to prove the concept, that will really allow us to then win you over on how ramp metering can actually be an effective strategy when it's done correctly.
I would throw our town manager on that list as well as stakeholders on a personal level. So my last question is capacity. When you showed that slide on freeway capacity, are you defining freeway capacity as just really simply bumper to bumper traffic, but we're still moving, bumper to bumper traffic where we're not moving, or like a level of service F?
Actually, that exhibit really isn't doing any of those things. What it's actually trying to illustrate is where the probability that the freeway will break down into a congested state starts to increase. So the maximum sustainable flow rate is a theoretical value that is supposed to represent, below that value, you would not expect the freeway to ever become unstable and fall into a congested state. When you reach that line, you've reached a point where now there's an increased probability that the freeway traffic flow will become unstable and will fall into a broken down state and become congested. And so it's a different mechanism from what you might be familiar with things like level of service or those types of approaches. Again, it was a concept that was developed by Vic Roads based on all of their research on how their freeways were able to be productive and move traffic. So they use it as a measure to help them identify if they have mainline issues, where they need to address those. Then also to identify if CARM can be an effective strategy to reduce that risk of breakdown. And so that's why we use this approach, and it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and just to add,
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to Darren's comment on this, one of the real fascinating things is that Vic Roads, they just didn't stop 15 years ago in terms of developing the software. They've been continually enhancing and developing and researching their process, their system, their algorithms for the last 15 years. And so they've actually have partnered with universities to do this constant evaluation and research. For example, they're already starting to think ahead in terms of autonomous vehicles. So they're looking at how does a system like this react when you've got a platoon amount of autonomous vehicles, and how does that going to affect the algorithm? So they're already thinking ahead and doing research and analysis of how do they modify this system to be able to keep track of with the trends and emerging technologies that are happening in this corridor. And they spend a lot of money and time and research on that. And so that's really the benefit of leveraging already a proven system, is we get to leverage all that research and analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Sue and then Scott.
A couple
No, Scott, Sue.
Okay. I'll cover Scott's questions too while I'm on here. So a couple things. One, what's the first phase going to include from to where?
So the study area that we're looking at for the first phase is from State Route 24 in the north to the Alameda County line in the south. So it'll include all of the ramps between those two locations. So Alcosta in the south up to State Route 24 in the north.
Okay. Only my concern is I think some of that large orange-red area was Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill. And so my concern is if you're able to get more traffic flowing through, certainly going northbound, it ends up exacerbating that problem in Pleasant Hill, which is where I am.
Yeah, we understand that. And certainly in the northbound direction, that will be an issue. And so one of the things that we will be doing is placing detection north of State Route 24 so that we can measure the traffic that's coming up the freeway and identify when we're starting to see instability in that area. so that we can actually use the metering further to the south to help regulate the amount of traffic that's flooding into that particular zone. Now, there are other issues in that area that Tim alluded to when he showed that simulation video that are being addressed by some of these other projects. And so ultimately, once those projects are implemented and the new ramp configuration is understood, we will be implementing this same approach through your neighborhood, like through your area. But we didn't feel that it would be prudent to do it at this time when there's still construction, the resolving of those other issues, and we don't really know what the ultimate ramp configuration is going to look like in that area. We do know what they look like south of State Route 24. There's no current plans to modify any of those interchanges further south.
No, I understand, and with all the work that's being done up in their area, it certainly makes sense. It's just going to be a harder sell from a, to the public if life is ugly for several years, that all these improvements are actually helping Pleasant Hill than rather hurting it. So southbound should help because it should get traffic flowing down that way. Northbound could be a little bit different problem. And then I just wanted to follow up on Karen's point, on the signage and how much money we put into these arterial signage, because while a lot of people don't use a phone, like my car has all the red lines on the navigation system to let me know where it's clogged and where I shouldn't be going and stuff like that, and warnings. And so, I'm assuming cars are all heading that direction. And so, I just want to make sure we're not spending so much time putting signs up when vehicles are heading in that direction, where they're going to give that information to you without having to have signs put up on roads.
Certainly. And again, we're looking at trying them at a sort of select locations as a demonstration to see if there is any effectiveness in using them. That will probably entail doing some market research with the drivers to see, are you using them? Do you notice them? Are they providing you any useful information? On the flip side, one of the other advantages of these types of traffic management systems is, as Tim pointed out, they are easily able to integrate the connected vehicle capabilities of these newer cars, the types of technologies that you're talking about. And as the cars get smarter, we will be able to use these systems to take information from the car in terms of how the traffic conditions are, but also to feed information back to your car so that way it can tell you the traffic on the freeway is moving slow. We want you to be in this lane, or we want you to take this particular route in order to get where you're going. So those are some of the future potential capabilities that a system like this will allow you to evolve into.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I just meant sort of the physical cost of putting up signs if our vehicles end up moving in that direction faster. To, we really have to evaluate whether we want to put that kind of money into signage along arterials if cars end up moving faster to that technology, and then we've sort of overdone the signage. So that was my only concern. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Any other committee members? I see Liz Ames from BART has a comment or a question, but I'm going to just run through the committee. Anyone else? Seeing none. Okay, Liz, please go ahead. And where did you disappeared?
You might have made that rookie mistake of hanging up on herself when she tried to unmute.
Well, that could have happened. So we will have her rejoin us shortly.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, there you are. Okay, you just.
All right, let me do my video. Oh my God, I'm in the dark here. Okay, hi. Okay, so I am really struggling over the express lanes just because it's increasing the vehicle volume and the density of vehicles on our roadways. The system sounds amazing and it's super efficient, and with what they would call, BART would call it throughput. Caltrans talks about throughput, getting cars quickly through the system as much as possible, or trucks as well. And the problem I have is that we're increasing the vehicles through our communities. And, we have to worry about climate change. I think it's already happening. I think it's irreversible at this point. They are saying that. And I like to think about the ways how we can mitigate or prevent more vehicle volume on our freeways by maybe doing bus only lanes. They do that in Colorado, near Denver, and the suburbs over to Boulder. And it's just like we're mechanizing, we're we're basically encouraging more driving in the Bay Area with this system. And then the other issue I have is, what are the impacts to the arterial roadways? So you're increasing the capacity of vehicles on the freeway up to 25%. And then these people are the folks have to go to their homes or to their jobs. And that vehicle volume is then going into our communities. That increased vehicle capacity is going onto our arterials. And my concern, I'm in Alameda County. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I am a BART director in Alameda County, representing South Hayward, Union City, Newark, and Fremont into Sunol, and that includes State Route Highway 84. And that's a 2-lane route that Caltrans maintains, and it's our watershed. We don't want it widened. And that enters into 680, where there's a gap closure, the express lane gap closure project happening between El Costa to Sunol. That's in the works, in the planning stages. So I'm concerned about the 680 corridor because of the vehicle volume increase. And I hope that this innovative team here, I know CCTA is really pro bus on shoulder. They're trying to get public transit in this narrative to be used and prioritized on our freeways. I think we need to start thinking like that. Colorado's been doing that. I believe San Diego is doing that. And I look forward to seeing that kind of collaboration and talking about public transit with this increase in vehicle volume, which is a concern, I think, for our entire region. So I don't want to be a downer on this. I'm hoping this is going to inspire you to do more.
Well, and actually, Liz, we've been doing a lot. And I know you haven't been involved very much in Contra Costa with what CCTA does, but particularly with Bus on the Shoulder, with express buses. We, ideally, we would have had BART connecting Dublin BART to Walnut Creek BART, so we wouldn't have people getting in their cars to get to a BART station as well. So it's something that I assure you, this is just one more tool in our toolkit, if nothing else, to move the buses along as well as we move forward. And so no, there is a huge push for the last mile. We have some wonderful studies we've done about how we could do more park and rides and how we could have more express buses and how we could get people to those park and rides after we realized that it would, if we were to try to run some kind of a transit system going, connecting, in essence, the end of Alameda County up to Walnut Creek BART, we're talking billions of dollars that no one had, and that really, politically, no one really wanted, including the BART board. So this to me, what we're discussing tonight is just one more element. Yes, we are very cognizant of the desire to get people out of their cars, and by no means is this an exclusive remedy. It's just one more piece that will really facilitate, hopefully, getting people into transit as well, because they will see the benefit. But thank you for being here and for your comments. And I know, Tim, you may have some more comments on that as well, simply because you have worked on so many different things that we have as part of our TEP and as part of our plan to really improve mobility throughout the county, while at the same time looking now, of course, at vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah, I mean, as part of Innovate 680, there's 3 primary goals. One is mode shift, shared mobility, and person throughput. So the strategy that we're talking about tonight is only one strategy out of the 7-prong approach as part of Innovate 680. So as Madam Chair Supervisor Anderson mentioned, is that this is just one tool in the toolbox to manage congestion on 680. And the nice thing about having a system like this is if you have more, you're relieving congestion in the corridor, it allows for express buses and transit to operate more efficiently in the corridor as well. So if you have, like, typically bus on shoulder only can operate when the adjacent lanes are 35 miles an hour or less. And so if you have a system like this, there may be a chance where the speeds would never drop below 35 miles an hour because you're getting so much more efficiency and more productivity out of the corridor. And then likewise, by having typically express lanes are typically advantageous to express bus service. So one of the things as I mentioned earlier, at the next meeting, the next policy advisory committee meeting, it's going to have a heavy focus with transit and talking about all of the things that we're working on from a transit perspective in terms of, share mobility hubs, transit signal priority systems on the local arterial systems, as well as providing for multimodal travel along the arterials in terms of Iron Horse Trail, bike share, car share, using our shared autonomous vehicle network that we plan in the future, as well as our goal. We also, with SB 743, we have to have a reduction of vehicle miles travels in this corridor. And so one of the things that we're actually doing is and this will be another future item that we'll bring to the PAC, most likely in February, is talking about, how we're actually developing a very robust VMT mitigation program in the corridor to be able, because even express lanes alone, as you've known, or have you mentioned, they do induce VMT. That's what express lanes do. But there's other strategies in the corridor where we can look at ways to offset that VMT with other strategies like bus on shoulder, share mobility hub, abilities of service, first and last mile, and making sure we have an integrated seamless network to make it attractive for people to use other modes and not use their vehicles. That is the whole premise behind Innovate 680.
Okay, any other questions, or Liz, do you have any follow-up on any of that? Okay, looking for other hands. Anyone else in the audience? Okay, we are going to move on. I think it's time now to talk for Tim. Let's talk about corridor partnership overview.
So to what we heard at the last meeting was, what are we doing to partner and to expand some of these types of strategies into other parts of the corridor outside of Contra Costa County? And so one of the things that we did is we actually formed the I-680 corridor partnership. And to date, we've actually had 2 meetings, and we've actually formed 4 working groups. And what we've been doing is we basically started from Solano in the north all the way to Santa Clara in the south. And so what we've been having is collaboration and coordination among Alameda County Transportation Commission, VTA, Solano Transportation Authority, CCTA, the 4 county transportation agencies along the corridor. We also have brought in MTC, CHP, Caltrans, and we're also working together with our 4 transit operators in the corridor. So Soltrans, BARTS, LAFTA, and County Connection. And what we've been doing is really coordinating together and looking for opportunities to leverage each other's work, understand where those gaps are, how do we fill in those gaps, how do we learn from each other, and how do we do a better job of integrating the work that we're doing together. So that way, one, we're saving taxpayers' dollars, we're not throwing away work, and we're leveraging what we're doing in the corridor. And so we work together to develop a cohesive vision for the corridor. And I think what's really important to note is that this is different than Innovate 680. What you're working together as the Policy Advisory Committee is you're working on Innovate 680 in Contra Costa County. Now what we do is we have this greater group that's really looking and shepherding how do we better work together along the corridor to integrate and develop a multimodal transportation corridor all the way from 80 all the way down to the 101. And so we want to make sure that we're having a seamless customer experience in the corridor. So as someone is traveling, as we know, from Solano or Fairfield, coming down into Pleasant Hill, there's a seamless experience for them. And we're making sure that we're also providing express bus and 1-seat rides in the corridor as well. So our goals that we developed with this group, which again are slightly different than the goals that you've been seeing for Innovate 680, is that we all want to make sure we're improving the safety, connectivity, and providing those personalized mobility options in the corridor. We want to make sure we're preparing the corridor for the future. So talking about technology and as each county is looking and piloting different types of technologies, which of those technologies are working, which of the ones are not working, and let's leverage and work together on the ones that are working. So that way, again, we're using the same technologies across the entire corridor. We also have goals to reduce greenhouse gas as well as vehicle miles traveled. So that's an important goal for the corridor. And also making sure we've got a fair and equitable transportation system along this entire corridor. And that goes hand in hand with our transportation demand management goals, as well as our TDM programs that we have, making sure we have consistency in terms of what we're offering to our public in terms of, and making sure that we have consistent programs such as guaranteed ride home programs, as well as other rewards and incentives that we might be trying to induce or get people to travel or change their travel behaviors in the corridor. So what we've been doing is we have 4 working groups. We actually are doing work together outside of these meetings. We've had 2 meetings so far. We have a technology working group, a transit working group, a express lane working group, as well as a TDM working group. And again, what we're trying to figure out is how do we provide a seamless customer experience in this corridor, making sure we've got cohesive strategies, but more importantly, making sure that we've developed the right priorities in the corridor for funding. So when we have big statewide or regional initiatives such as like Faster, we're not all scrambling trying to develop our project list between the 4 counties. We got one cohesive list, one plan that is essentially one voice for the entire corridor to better position this corridor for funding, both statewide, federal funding, as well as local and regional funding, and also to work together to integrate transit. I am as Supervisor Andrews mentioned, I'm a huge fan of integrated transit. If in the Measure J Transportation Expenditure Plan, there was this concept of developing an integrated transit plan, and that CCTA would take a larger role in transit planning the corridor. And that's also being discussed at the Blue Ribbon Task Force that MTC is working with all the transit operators. And so again, how do we take what we're doing individually and better collaborate and integrate that into a seamless system? And that's the whole purpose of this group, to again have one voice. And so just an example of outcomes. After the second meeting, we actually had an action item to go meet with MTC and better position the 680 corridor in Plan Bay Area 2050 to make sure that this corridor will be eligible for regional discretionary funding in the future for operations for express bus services. And so we basically Soul Trans and Solano and County Connection also came up and worked together in developing, how can we do a better job of providing a 1-seat service from Solano down to Pleasant Hill and ultimately down to Dublin and then all the way down to Santa Clara. And so we looked at these existing services, and what's happening in the corridor is we're actually working on a planned express bus service in the corridor. The study is actually being led by LAFTA, but we're leveraging what we're doing with Innovate 680. We're leveraging what they're doing and making sure, again, that we're coordinated and integrated. And one example of that is that this particular plan has identified regional one-stop express bus service. So when you look at the gray dots, those are the actual stops that would happen in the corridor. There's actually one stop that's missing on here, which is the Bollinger Canyon Park and Ride in San Ramon to better serve Bishop Ranch. And so what the whole idea is to have someone travel from Amtrak Sassoon Station and go down to Pleasant Hill. Well, one thing that we found is that Soul Trans had a one-stop seat ride all the way to Pleasant Hill BART. Well, this plan is focusing on Walnut Creek BART station. So we're already using the discussions and the coordination efforts from the I-680 corridor partnership to already change and modify existing services to better coordinate and again have better connectivity between County Connection and Soul Trans. So that's just one example that's already an outcome of this I-680 corridor partnership. And we're continuing to meet. We have another meeting in December, and I wanted to make it really clear that this is Innovate 680 is not being developed just in Contra Costa County. We're looking for ways to leverage what other counties are doing and expand again to have a more cohesive multimodal corridor on the I-680. So I wanted to share all that with you so you understand everything that we're doing, not just in Contra Costa, but along the entire corridor. I mean, we're all learning from each other as well. So that just concludes my presentation. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, any other? Luella, please go ahead.
So this is all falling into the jobs housing thing where we're starting north and we're going south to Silicon Valley. Are we attempting at all to balance any of the job housing demands with this? Does it work the other way?
So it's a good question. So one of the things is, based on our coordination with MTC, we basically talked about how to better plan for better land use in Contra Costa County to better serve, to be able to create jobs, and so that we have less trips coming out of Contra Costa County. The other thing is that MTC, when the new arena goals came out mid this year, MTC hasn't taken the opportunity to update the Plan Bay Area 2015 modeling with those new arena goals, and so that's the next step that needs to happen. And so we're trying to better understand one, from a land use perspective, and also with the new arena goals, how can we better accommodate, again, jobs in Contra Costa County, rather than focusing, moving people out into other regions, but we are focusing both on, job growth as well as, congestion.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments at this time? And Liz, your hand is still up. I'm assuming that's just your last comment, and I'm going to put your, oh, that's a new comment. Okay, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I really appreciate that, Tim, on the bus service, the regional express bus service. And I'd like to say that's encouraging. If we're increasing our vehicle volume by 25%, I don't know how we're going to get the VMTs to be, or the greenhouse gases less. And I would hope to see the connection to 880, 680 to 880, because 880 also has HOV express lanes. And then to the point of the job housing imbalance, which I campaigned on a lot. I really do think that issue really needs to be addressed at the MTC level. I know BART, we made some policies at the BART board of asking for jobs at the BART stations and pushing for these communities like on the peninsula, where people are super commuting, say from your area and beyond over to Palo Alto through the Dumbarton Bridge, that's Highway 84. I'm asking those folks on the peninsula and in San Francisco to build the workforce housing if they have so many jobs, and the other jobs could be built in our communities, like in Contra Costa and Alameda counties, where we're basically the bedroom or the housing for the jobs elsewhere. So I appreciate that. That would reduce a lot of the traveling on the freeways. And I just hope, back to the public transit, that we can start integrating all of the interstates, 880 and highway or State Route 84 over to the peninsula eventually. There's supposed to be a bus depot at Ardenwood at 84 that could take that commuter traffic through via buses. So thank you so much for that presentation, and that's encouraging to see public transit incorporated on the freeways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment as well? I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm not seeing any arms flailing wildly at me. So let's move on to our next agenda item. And I think Danielle Stanislaus, you are going to be leading us through sort of the one of our final discussions about this evening regarding future agendas, meeting times, etc.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So Danielle Stanislaus with Emergent Transportation Concepts, a part of the consultant team for Innovate 680, and I serve as your stakeholder engagement manager, but also as a part of the system management team. So we hope that you found the information that we've presented today to be useful, informative, and usually at this point in the agenda, we open it up for an opportunity for you all to provide additional feedback, comments, suggestions for future PAC meeting agenda items. But before doing that, we wanted to first give a little more context to this conversation and provide you all with some specific thoughts on some possible future PAC agenda topics based on what we're seeing at both the project and program level now that we've actually done enough work and we're far enough along in the development process. So Tim, if you can go to the next slide. So these are just a couple of possible topics, and you've heard some of these mentioned this evening. So these things also are brought forth from not only the project work side specifically that the consultant teams are working on, but also through, as Darren and Tim mentioned earlier, some of our individual one-on-one meetings that we've had with your own staff at your local jurisdictions, some of your city manager, public works, definitely some of your traffic engineering folks that are on the line right now. So certain policy type conversations that have risen to the top of our minds have to do with things like shared control, that notion of ongoing operations along the corridor. How are we sharing that control and managing holistically? Of course, we all know about the long-term operations and maintenance issues, including the sustainable funding for that. We know that that's coming up. It's already come up in some of our individual one-on-one conversations, and we recognize that that's a policy conversation at the heart. This was just mentioned a little bit ago about shifting from that car-centric culture to use transit and shared mobility. And as Tim mentioned, we are eyeing the next Policy Advisory Committee meeting in February to dive more deeply into that and how that aligns with many of our Innovate 680 goals that have to do with person throughput and mode shift. And then this conversation around equity. We had that conversation as a part of the first and last mile TAC ConOps working group meeting that we held in July. The notion of how does equity play in the communities of concern, access considerations, particularly when you're talking about the use of new technologies. And then finally, last but certainly not least, and it's been mentioned a couple times this evening, SB 743 and VMT considerations for the Innovate 680 program. So these are just a couple, and we are by no means locked into these. And we want to definitely be open to anything else you all would suggest. But we wanted to just put this kind of on the radar. Tim, can you go to the next slide before I toss it back to our chair? The other thing we just wanted to do a quick refresher on, and I think the last time you all saw this graphic was at the first meeting, so 2 meetings ago. And just to reiterate what the decision-making process is and kind of where you all fit in that process. So we have, starting at the bottom, the corridor management team comprised of a lot of the consultant team members that make up that suite of 7 projects that Tim has been referencing. That rolls up to our strategic development team that consists of a lot of the agency, regional agency staff. So staff, of course, from CCTA, but also from Caltrans, MTC, FHWA, and CHP. Those folks roll up to the program leadership team, but you can also see that that's where we start to engage the TAC. And the TAC is really the technical staff at each of your local jurisdictions. Those are the folks that we've been working with when we say we're having these TAC ConOps working group meetings. We're having meetings with the TAC, your staff, as well as with the program leadership team. That's the agencies, the 5 that I mentioned, Caltrans, CCTA, MTC, CHP, and FHWA. The program leadership team rolls up to the executive steering committee. And I will say that so far we have not yet convened the executive steering committee because, as you all are well aware, we've only started to kind of dip our toes into some of these bigger decisions and some of these policy conversations. It is our intent, though, that as we continue these conversations with you all, that your feedback will be invaluable to helping to inform those conversations with the executive steering committee. And those executive steering committee agencies, as a reminder, are CCTA, Caltrans, and MTC at the top executive level. And that rolls up to then back to your board. So ultimately, all of this decision-making hierarchy flows up to the board. And I know several of you do sit on the board. And so, this is kind of the decision-making authority and how you all fit in and how these meetings help fit into that decision-making process. So again, we recognize that there haven't been too many policy issues in and of themselves that have brought to you yet. But hopefully with the list I just showed a moment ago, along with some of the things that have started to come up even through our discussions this evening, you can see that that's going to be changing in the future. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Madam Chair to facilitate any questions or comments on this.
Great, thank you so much, Danielle. Okay, Sue.
It's my role always asking questions. I guess one of the thoughts I sit on the County Connection Board as well, and obviously there are a lot of challenges coming up related to COVID. Is there anything that we need to think about, and this may be a subject for a future meeting, as to how COVID impacts any of our decisions and processes going forward? I mean, if this thing drags on for another year, not only the way people travel, but also the financial condition of all these entities that are involved in this and their ability to form these partnerships and act if they're financially constrained. So is that something that might be worthwhile discussing at some point?
So,
okay. Go ahead, Danielle, please.
I was going to just field that at first and toss it over to Tim, because I'm sure he would like to expand. I know at the program and project level, we've been having as a regular standing item any of the COVID impacts from a institutional, organizational, financial standpoint with our partner agencies. And on the operational level, to empower our performance-based decision-making, we've started tracking both on the transit side and on the highway facility side, what that means in terms of VMT, what that means in terms of operations, because it is our intent as we start bringing some of these policy conversations and some of the issues around funding to have some of that technical information as well as some of the institutional and organizational constraints handy to inform those conversations. So Tim, I don't know if there's anything more you want to further elaborate on with that.
I think you captured it really well. I think the other aspect of this is that's one of the reasons why we've actually put some projects on hold, is we're doing an evaluation of how COVID's going to impact those projects in terms of the timing and implementation of the strategies in the overall corridor. The other aspects of it is we are collecting regular data on a monthly basis of how the corridor is actually performing. So we can certainly add this as a future agenda item, and certainly we were planning on addressing a good portion of this in the February transit item, and we were planning on having County Connection do some presentations as well as LAFTA.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions, comments? Mark.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. To Sue's question, that it's something, being in real estate, and I'm noticing this with the large office parks, I'm now seeing, and it's a trickle now, but a lot of sublease opportunities. So a lot of these office parks, the major employers are finding that they don't need as much space as they've leased. We're going to get for years now, because these are not month-to-month leases. I think in a lot of these large office parks along the 680 corridor is a sudden plethora of subleased space, which means smaller companies are going to take advantage of bargain rate office space. So while we have on the one hand a lot of work at home scenarios for larger companies and larger employers, their leased space, if their property managers are doing their job, they're going to backfill it with a lot of sublet opportunities, which is going to create an interesting shift in the traffic patterns. And I would wonder if there's a way to kind of keep that in mind when projecting this out. I think we're going to have I won't say a paradigm shift, but we are going to have a shift in the usage of these buildings. It's going to be quite dramatic. Maybe there's a way that the flow of the traffic to these buildings, it's an opportunity to maybe manage that as well as the arterials and the on-ramps. That's it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. Any additional comments? And again, looking to anyone else who is here on the call. Okay, terrific. Well, that will then.
Candace, do you mind if I comment, Candace?
Oh, no, absolutely, Robert. I'm sorry. I missed your hand.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure we're going to go through this, but if we could, get continuous updates on the bus on the shoulders and where we're at with our timeline. We don't meet enough to sort of remember what the timelines are. So if we could be refreshed each time we meet to figure out, how much further along down the road we are, that'd be very helpful.
Okay. Thank you. Absolutely, those updates are helpful. Okay, so talking about this schedule, are you going to be presenting anything more on that? Any more specificity?
Just Madam Chair, just so I understand, the schedule for the bus on shoulder, or you mean our next item with the PAC meeting?
I'm just looking at the agenda and just seeing if there's anything else for future meeting dates, quarterly PAC meetings, 2021.
Yes. So Tim, if you could jump us back to that item. Okay. So this is the last item, I believe, on the agenda for discussion. So thank you, Madam Chair. The following are the proposed PAC meeting dates for next calendar year, 2021. We, of course, can add or cancel meetings as needed. We want to be cognizant of your time and make sure we're not just meeting for the sake of meeting. But as you could see, there are some topics coming up that we definitely feel we're going to need your input on. So for this particular item, there is action needed to approve these dates. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any comments about these specific meeting dates and times? And if we've got both, I'm just scrolling through, and even though we're sharing a screen. Okay, not seeing any. Do I have a motion to accept this proposed meeting dates?
So moved.
Okay, we've got a motion by Sue. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we got a second. And did you get that, Terry Ann? Okay, so could we please have a roll call vote on that?
Yes. Sorry.
You know, I caught you off guard. I don't. We're ready to go. Back to meeting mode. No more presentations.
Sorry about that. Somehow I closed the document. Okay, I have it back up here.
Oh, Karen.
All right.
Wait, before you go, Terry
So-
Ann, Karen, go ahead.
So these are what, the second Wednesdays?
With the exception of June 30th, that's the 5th Wednesday.
And the rest are the second Wednesdays. They,
Correct.
I'm not sure what's happening with my tax practice right now. 2 of those are the day before taxes are due. So they're not great dates for me. But also the second Wednesday is when we meet for Valley Link. And that meeting goes from a long time over in usually, well, used to meet mostly in Tracy anyway and so that meets till late in the afternoon, till after 5, sometimes 5:30. So
Okay. So
usually till about 5, and then you're all the way over there when we get back to like a normal lifestyle. So I don't know if these are just the times you've always been meeting or not. They just happen to be very bad dates for me. So.
okay. And then I guess that would lead
because third Wednesday is CCTA, so I know you all
right.
have that.
So I'm sure we're trying to avoid that, and I guess that would leave open a first or a fourth Wednesday. Is there a CCTA need for a specific Wednesday? And I would ask if anyone else has conflicts on other Wednesdays.
So first Wednesday's planning committee for the authority.
Okay, so that doesn't work. So then it would leave it with fourth Wednesday. Scott?
The Tri-Valley Council meets on the 4th Thursday in the quarter that they meet. They only meet once a quarter, but it's always on the 4th Thursday.
The fourth Thursday, but not the fourth
Wednesday.
The fourth Wednesday is what you're saying. Okay. Well, why don't
okay.
Oh,
no, we also have a Citizens Advisory Committee on the 4th Wednesday.
Okay. Well, so Karen,
We're gonna have to work on that.
why don't we, hopefully for the next couple of meetings, we're going to be able to do it remotely, although certainly that shouldn't affect it. Let's see post-COVID if we need to mid-year reevaluate once we're driving places and all the rest. But for now, it sounds like this is the better Wednesday, although there's nothing to say it has to be on Wednesday. Certainly Tuesdays are often council meetings, which make it challenging. Thursdays, there are always conflicts. So I don't have.
I appreciate what you're trying to do. I don't know how many people have fourth Tuesday meetings. Just to throw that out for thought in the future.
Okay.
Because we don't usually have fourth Tuesday. Scott does. Okay.
San Ramon. Okay. It's really challenging. So
it is. Okay.
Okay. For now, we'll go with this because this is just a quarterly meeting. It's not monthly. And do I have a motion then to accept this?
You did.
I already did from Sue, but I don't think I had a second. I know.
Robert and Mark both seconded it.
It was Mark's second. Okay. I've been in meetings almost 12 hours now.
Just trying to help out here, Candace.
I appreciate that because I'm about done, and then we've got 3 CTA first thing in the morning. Okay,
you and me both.
That's right. I know. Okay, and that's right because that's where Terry was going to be doing roll call when we got off on this windy thing. And thank you, Karen, for bringing up that discussion. So, not that we resolved anything.
No, but at least you resolved to bring it back mid-year for discussion.
I would be very happy to. Yeah, particularly if you're trying to get from Tracy all the way into Walnut Creek. There's this little thing called a 680 backup that you might encounter. Get there. So anyway, and that gave you time, Terry, to find your list. So we're good.
Thank you. We could also potentially consider 7 p.m. if anyone is interested in that. A later meeting? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. Member Brown?
Lost her.
She may have signed off and I missed that. It looks like she's absent.
Okay.
Member Haskew?
Yes.
Member Mitchoff is absent. Member Obringer,
Yes.
Member Perkins,
Yes.
Member Ross,
Yes.
Member Storer,
Yes.
Member Stepper,
Yes. So through COVID. Anyway.
Vice Chair Noack,
Yes.
Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously with Brown and Mitchoff absent.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. And we've got in our packet an Innovate 680 brochure. Any comments too from the committee is what I'm looking at. Any comments from the public on this? Okay, and so we are now going to adjourn, and we are adjourning at 7:57 p.m., just under 2 hours. So enjoy your evening. I will see some of you in
Bright and early.
13 hours. We've got 13 hours till our next meeting, Robert.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
We'll
you for
be there.
being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good night, guys.
Thank you.
Good.